We have scrutinized the Bible line by line, studied the Quran, the Vedas, and the ancient Apocrypha, and compared them rigorously with archaeological data from the last 50 years. The results of this investigation were nothing short of shocking. The sacred texts actually contain traces of people who walked this earth before Adam. And let me be clear, this is neither a mere conspiracy theory nor an act of heresy. It is a direct reference found within the text of Genesis itself, a text that believers have been reading for 2,000 years. Yet, for some mysterious reason, they fail to notice a logical contradiction the size of an entire civilization. If Adam and Eve were truly the first people on earth, then who was their son Cain so terrified of after he took the life of his brother Abel? Why did God feel compelled to place a mark upon him specifically so that he would not be killed by others? Who were these mysterious outsiders from whom he needed such divine protection if there were only 3 living souls left on the entire planet? And perhaps most critically, where exactly did Cain's wife come from if Eve was the only woman in the world? These questions threaten to destroy the entire traditional concept of the first humans. But the sacred texts do provide an answer, only it is one that has been diligently ignored. Our analysis has revealed a distinct pattern. The Bible, the Quran, and the ancient Apocrypha all mention other beings who existed alongside Adam. Furthermore, archaeology confirms the existence of Homo sapiens 100,000 years before the standard biblical chronology. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Cro-Magnons lived, built structures, and buried their dead long before. Their DNA is still carried within us today. So the evidence suggests that Adam was not the first. Then who was he really, and who were those who lived before him? Do you believe people could have existed before Adam? Write your thoughts on this paradox in the comments below. Let us begin with the specific passage that theologians often avoid discussing, the book of Genesis chapter 4. Cain has killed Abel. God has cursed him and condemned him to a life of eternal wandering. And it is then that Cain utters a phrase that shatters all conventional logic. He tells God that anyone who meets me will kill me. Anyone, but who is this anyone? According to the strict biblical chronology, there are only 3 people on earth at this precise moment: Adam, Eve, and Cain himself. Abel is dead. Adam and Eve do not yet have other children, as the text mentions them only later. So who is Cain so afraid of? Wild animals? If so, why does God place a mark on him explicitly so that man will not kill him? The mark is protection from people, not from lions or wolves. Theologians attempt to explain this away. They argue that Adam and Eve must have already given birth to many other children by that time, but the text simply does not list them. Very well, let's assume for a moment that is true. But then we face a new glaring problem. Cain travels to the land of Nod and takes a wife there. Where did she emerge from? If she was merely Cain's sister, why does the text not state so directly? Why does it specify that he found a wife in the land of Nod? It is written as if people were already residing there. Moreover, the very same chapter states that Cain founded a city for whom? If he only has a wife and a couple of children, why does he need city walls, streets, and complex infrastructure? Cities are built for a population, but where did this population come from if all humanity descended solely from Adam and Eve? This paradox has been troubling Bible scholars for 15 centuries. Some of the church fathers acknowledged that the text contains a significant logical gap. St. Augustine wrote that Cain's story raises difficult questions, but he insisted that one must believe regardless. Faith, he argued, is above logic. However, what if logic and faith do not actually contradict each other? What if the text has simply been misunderstood all this time? An analysis of the ancient Apocrypha provides a crucial clue. There is a text that was not included in the standard biblical canon. It is known as the Book of Enoch. It states explicitly that giants, the Nephilim, lived on the earth before the flood. Moreover, it mentions the sons of God, who came down to the daughters of men and took them as wives. Who are these daughters of men, if Adam was supposedly the first man? The answer sounds radical, yet it closes all the logical gaps perfectly. Adam was not the first man in the biological sense. He was the first man of a special type, the first with whom God made a specific covenant, the first to receive an immortal soul. Before him, there were already other people living on the earth, ordinary mortal humans, existing without that specific covenant with God. This interpretation explains everything. Cain feared these other tribes, the people outside of Adam's lineage. He took a wife from among them. He founded a city for a multitude, for a population that already existed in the wild. The mark of God protected him from those who did not know the God of Adam. My analysis indicates that the text of Genesis was originally written with this exact worldview in mind, but later editors of the Bible removed the explicit references to other people, leaving behind only hints and shadows. Why would they do this? Because the idea of the chosenness of Adam and his descendants required that they be the only ones. Politically, this narrative was advantageous. Religiously, it strengthened the position of the people of Israel as God's unique creation. But the traces remain, and these traces lead us to a shocking conclusion. Adam was not the first human being, he was the first God-man. Before him, the earth was teeming with ordinary people whom no one expelled from paradise because they had never been there to begin with. Now let us turn our gaze to the Quran. There, the story of Adam is told somewhat differently, but the underlying contradiction remains. In Surah 2, God tells the angels that he will create a vicegerent on earth. The angels object immediately. They ask, why create someone who will shed blood and commit wickedness on earth? How do the angels know that man will shed blood if Adam has not yet been created? Where did they acquire this experience of observing human violence? The traditional explanation offered is this: the angels had seen the jinn who lived on earth before man, and did evil. Okay, but the text speaks specifically about man, not the jinn. Moreover, another surah states that God created man from clay, which was taken from the earth. What earth? If Adam was the absolute first, then there could not have been any earth containing human remains or history before him. Islamic theologians have been debating this point for centuries. Some acknowledge the possibility of the existence of peoples prior to Adam. Ibn Arabi, the renowned Sufi mystic and thinker, wrote that Adam was not the first man, but rather the first prophet. Before him, there were other Adams, and other cycles of humanity that have been lost to time. While this concept is often branded as heretical, it is not, strictly speaking, logically contradictory. If we dare to synthesize the biblical and Quranic texts, a startling picture emerges. People were already walking the earth. God selected one among them, named him Adam, breathed a unique spirit into him, granted him the knowledge of the names of all things, and appointed him as his representative. The rest of the population remained as they were, ordinary mortals. The descendants of Adam eventually mingled with them. Cain found his wife among them. This is precisely how modern humanity was forged. This version of history explains not only the gaping logical holes in the ancient texts, but also aligns perfectly with hard scientific data. Modern genetics reveals that we carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. If Adam was indeed Homo sapiens, and the beings before him were other subspecies, then the genetic mixing explains itself. Archaeology tells the identical story. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago. They migrated into Eurasia about 70,000 years ago. There they encountered Neanderthals, who had dominated Europe for 300,000 years, and they interbred. This is a scientific fact solidified by the analysis of ancient DNA. Consider the timeline. Biblical chronology assigns Adam an age of roughly 6,000 years. If we calculate the time from Adam to Christ using the genealogies found in the Gospels, we arrive at approximately 4000 BC. Add the 2,000 years since then, and we have 6,000 years. Yet, science proves irrefutably that humans lived 100,000 years before that date. The contradiction is glaring and obvious. The traditional method of resolving this conflict is to declare science to be erroneous or merely allegorical, to claim the Earth is truly only 6,000 years old, and that all radiocarbon dating is flawed. But to do so requires rejecting thousands of independent studies conducted across different nations using different methodologies, all yielding consistent results. That is simply illogical. The alternative is to acknowledge that while Adam may have lived 6,000 years ago, there were indeed other people before him. Suddenly, science and religion cease to be at war. Adam becomes not the first human biologically, but the first human spiritually, the first to fully realize God, the first to receive the moral law. This interpretation is not a modern invention. It was put forward centuries ago. Isaac Lapierre, a French theologian, penned a controversial book titled Pre-Adamite. He claimed that Adam was merely the ancestor of the Jews, and that other nations descended from those created earlier. His book was burned, and he was forced to recant, but the idea refused to die. Tragically, in later centuries, the pre-Adamite theory returned only to be twisted by racists to justify slavery. They claimed they descended from Adam, while others were pre-Adamites, and therefore inferior. This was a vile corruption devoid of logic. Genetics has since proven that all humans belong to the same species, Homo sapiens, and that racial differences are merely superficial. But because of this dark history, the pre-Adamite theory became taboo. However, logic remains logic. If we strip away the prejudice and look strictly at the facts, the picture is clear. People lived long before Adam. Adam was a special vessel for revelation, his line mixed with the others. Modern humanity carries the genes of both. Now let us return to the text of Genesis and consider another profound hint. Chapter 6. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. Who are these sons of God? Tradition says they are the descendants of Seth, the righteous third son of Adam, while the daughters of men are the sinful line of Cain. But the text does not say that. It clearly distinguishes between the sons of God and the daughters of men. If it were simply about Seth and Cain, it would have been written that way. A more natural interpretation is this: the sons of God are the descendants of Adam, chosen with a spiritual nature, and the daughters of men are women from the pre-Adamite tribes, ordinary people. Their mixing gave birth to giants, the Nephilim. They were hybrids of two types of humanity. They possessed strength, but lost the divine blessing. They became arrogant and depraved. It was their sins that led to the flood. God decided to wipe out this mixed race and start over with Noah, who was blameless in his generation, meaning a pure descendant of Adam, without the admixture of pre-Adamite blood. This version explains why the flood was necessary. It was not just because people sinned, people always sin, but because the spiritual line of Adam was dissolving into the mass of ordinary humanity. God wanted to preserve this line pure, and Noah was the last remnant. After the flood, humanity began again, but this time with the weight of history behind it. Archaeology provides an interesting fact. About 12,000 years ago, there was a sharp change in human culture, known as the Neolithic Revolution. People moved from hunting and gathering to agriculture and animal husbandry. The first cities rose, and writing, mathematics, and astronomy appeared. This happened almost simultaneously in different parts of the world: Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, as if someone had given a synchronized impetus to development. Biblical chronology places the flood at about the same time. If we count from Noah to Abraham, it places us roughly 4,500 years ago, give or take a millennium, depending on the calculation. Coincidence or not, the flood was a real event, a catastrophe after which the survivors created a new civilization. Geology confirms that the Ice Age ended about 12,000 years ago. Huge masses of ice melted. The ocean level rose by 120 meters, flooding the coastal plains where most people lived. It was a global cataclysm, the memory of which has been preserved in the myths of all peoples. The Sumerians, Babylonians, Greeks, Indians, Chinese, and American Indians all tell of the Great Flood. If Noah was a real person, then he was one of the survivors of this planetary reset. His family preserved the knowledge of the previous civilization and passed it on to the future. This would explain the sudden explosion of cultural development following the flood. Humanity did not stumble upon agriculture and civilization from scratch. They were remembering what they had known before the waters rose. But let us circle back to the central mystery. Who exactly were the people before Adam? Our analysis suggests three distinct possibilities. First, they may have been other species of the genus Homo, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps others whose remains are still waiting to be unearthed. They were intelligent, certainly, but they lacked a specific spiritual nature. In this view, Adam was the first Homo sapiens sapiens, a doubly intelligent human, awakened not only in mind, but also in spirit. The second possibility is that Adam's contemporaries were the same Homo sapiens as he was, but they lived in different regions of the globe. While Adam appeared in the Middle East roughly 6,000 years ago, tribes of hunter-gatherers were already roaming Africa, Asia, and Europe. They were anatomically identical, yet culturally primitive. Adam brought a new culture, a new consciousness, and his descendants eventually assimilated the aboriginal populations. The third possibility is that Adam's people were the survivors of a previous, lost civilization that perished in a global cataclysm. In this scenario, Adam was not literally created from dust in a magical sense, but became the progenitor of a new human culture rising from the ashes of catastrophe. The biblical story, then, begins at the moment the survivors started to rebuild. Before that, there was another history, about which the text remains ominously silent. Which of these theories holds the truth? My investigation points to a convergence of the first and second. Adam was a Homo sapiens emerging in the Middle East during the Neolithic era. Before him, and parallel to him, other human populations existed. Some were distinct species, like the fading Neanderthals. Others were human, but had not yet experienced the cultural breakthrough. Adam became the symbolic father of a new civilization that quickly spread and absorbed the older tribes. This version contradicts neither science nor religion. It simply offers a different perspective on who Adam really was, not the first man biologically, but the first man spiritually. Not the only representative of the species, but the chosen vessel through whom God revealed himself to the world. Yet, if we accept this, a terrifying new question arises from the shadows: what became of the souls of those who lived before Adam? If Adam was the first to receive an immortal soul, did the people before him die permanently, fading into nothingness? Did they possess souls of a different nature? Or perhaps the soul was not given to Adam in Eden, but existed in all humans from the beginning, making the story of Eden purely symbolic. Theologians often avoid this question with silence, but logic demands an answer. If the people before Adam lacked souls, then killing them would not have been a sin. Why then did God forbid Cain from killing those he feared? If they did have souls, then why was Adam necessary at all? It turns out that the very concept of the soul is as nebulous as the concept of the first man. A deep textual analysis paints a very different picture. The soul in the original Bible and Quran is not some invisible ghost trapped inside the body. It is the breath of life that God breathed into man. In Hebrew, the word is neshama. In the Quran, it is ruh. But these same words are used to denote the wind, or the spirit in a general sense, not necessarily an immortal entity. The concept of the immortal soul, as we know it, appeared much later, heavily influenced by Greek philosophy. It was Plato who taught of the eternal soul imprisoned in a mortal body. This idea penetrated Judaism through Hellenized scholars, and later passed into Christianity. But originally in the Bible, souls were understood differently, as a life force that returns to God after death, but does not necessarily exist separately from the body. If we apply this ancient logic to the people before Adam, the picture becomes clear. All humans possess the life force, but Adam received a special gift, a covenant with God, and a specific promise of resurrection. His descendants inherited this covenant. The people before Adam lived and died without this specific promise, but that does not mean they were lesser beings. They simply existed within a different system of relationship with the divine. This interpretation solves many historical problems. It explains why the Bible mentions other people in Adam's time, and why genetics proves the deep antiquity of humanity. It explains why archaeology finds advanced cultures tens of thousands of years before the biblical timeline, and why different nations have their own creation myths unrelated to Genesis. They are the echoes of pre-Adamite tribes who had their own histories. But traditional theology recoils from this logic. Why? Because it threatens the very foundation of Adam's uniqueness. If Adam was not the absolute first man, then his fall cannot be the biological cause of death for all humanity. If death existed before Adam, then the traditional understanding of Christ's atonement is challenged. We are told Christ died to undo the consequences of Adam's sin, but if Adam did not bring death into the world, why did Christ have to die? This is a serious foundational objection, and it requires us to revise our concept of the fall. My analysis proposes a different, darker truth. Adam did not introduce physical death to the world. Physical death has always been the law of nature. All living creatures die. What Adam brought was spiritual death, a severance of the relationship with God, a loss of direct access to the divine presence. Before the fall, Adam was in paradise, a state of perfect harmony. After the fall, he was expelled, cut off from the tree of life. This is a symbol of the loss of immortality, not of the body, but of the spirit. Adam became mortal in his connection to the divine. He passed this spiritual mortality to his descendants. Christ came to restore that connection, to defeat spiritual death, and to offer the possibility of a resurrection that is not merely physical, but transcendent. In this logic, the people before Adam did not need redemption. because they never had a covenant that was broken. They lived and died in the natural cycle. Adam's descendants received more, but they also lost more, and only through Christ could they regain what was lost. This interpretation is controversial. Many theologians would brand it heresy, but it is logically consistent, and it is the only theory that explains all the paradoxes. This framework allows us to finally reconcile the deep antiquity of humanity with biblical chronology, to align the cold facts of science with the warmth of faith, and to harmonize historical evidence with sacred text. Of course, a skeptic might argue that this is a dangerous path. If the Bible is incorrect about the very first man, how can it be trusted on any other matter? If Adam was not the absolute first, then perhaps Christ was not the only Savior. If one foundational element is merely symbolic, then perhaps everything is symbolic. This argument is understandable, yet it relies on a false dichotomy, the idea that either everything must be literal or nothing is true at all. But a text can possess profound truth without every word being historically literal. Consider the parables of Christ. They do not become false simply because the prodigal son was not a real flesh and blood historical figure. They are true spiritually, even if they are fictional in fact. The same logic may apply to the story of Adam. Perhaps it is not a police report about a specific individual, but a theological parable about the emergence of human consciousness, about that precise moment when man became aware of himself, aware of God, and aware of the difference between good and evil. We know that this moment in the history of evolution did happen. Anthropologists refer to it as the cognitive revolution. It occurred roughly 70,000 years ago. Suddenly, and mysteriously, humans began to create art, believe in gods, and bury their dead with complex rituals. Something fundamental changed in their consciousness. Perhaps this was the actual moment when God breathed life into man. If so, then Adam is not a specific person, but a symbol of the entire generation that made this leap in consciousness. All subsequent humans are the descendants of this leap. And those who lived before the cognitive revolution, the people before Adam, were anatomically the same, yet mentally different, beings without self-awareness, without complex language, without culture. This version is elegant, but there is a significant problem with it. The Bible describes Adam as a specific tangible person with a wife and children. It traces his genealogy directly to Noah, to Abraham, and eventually to Christ. If Adam is merely a symbol, then the entire genealogy is symbolic, and if the lineage is symbolic, then is Christ also just a symbol? Theologians are right to fear this slippery slope. A delicate balance is required here. It is entirely possible that Adam was a real person who lived 6,000 years ago, but he was not the first person biologically. He could have been the first prophet, the first human with whom God made a specific covenant. His story is recorded in symbolic language, but it is based on a reality. There were other people before him, but they did not possess the revelation. After him, his descendants became the specific people of God. This does not negate the reality of Adam, but places him in a much broader context. Archaeology in the Middle East reveals a fascinating corroborating fact. About 6,000 years ago, the Sumerian civilization suddenly appeared in Mesopotamia. It was the world's first true city-state, complete with writing, laws, and religion. The Sumerians claimed that they received their knowledge from gods, who descended from the heavens. They possessed a myth about the creation of man from the clay of the goddess Ninursag. The parallel with Adam is obvious and uncanny. Perhaps the story of Adam is a Jewish retelling of this older Sumerian myth, or conversely, the Sumerian myth is a distortion of a real event that the Jews recorded more accurately. In either case, there is a connection, and this connection suggests that the story of the first man is not unique. Many cultures remember a specific turning point, when the gods created humans or endowed them with intelligence. What if this is a memory of a real event, a moment when there was a sudden leap in human consciousness, or perhaps contact with a more advanced civilization, or even a genetic experiment? These theories sound fantastic, but they explain why the exact same motifs are repeated in the myths of vastly different peoples. Some researchers go even further. They claim that Adam was the result of genetic modification carried out by extraterrestrial beings. They argue that the gods in ancient texts are actually astronauts who visited Earth and created modern humans by crossing local hominids with their own genetic material. This theory is known as paleocontact, or the ancient astronaut theory. My analysis shows that this version lacks sufficient hard evidence. Yes, ancient texts contain strange descriptions of heavenly chariots and shining beings, but interpreting them as spaceships is a leap of logic. Ancient people described unusual natural phenomena, visions, and religious experiences. These were not necessarily encounters with aliens. However, the core idea that Adam was the result of outside intervention is not so absurd. If we discard the aliens and return to theology, we arrive at the same conclusion: God intervened in the natural course of evolution and created a special man, Adam, or breathed a new spirit into an already existing human, making him godlike. This intervention is supernatural, not extraterrestrial, but the mechanism is strikingly similar. The question remains, was this intervention a one-time event or a multiple occurrence? If God created only Adam, where did the other people come from? If he created many, why does the text mention only one? Logic leads us to the conclusion that Adam was chosen from among many. He was not literally sculpted from dust, but was selected from among existing people and given a special status. This interpretation aligns with what some modern theologians call evolutionary creationism or theistic evolution. The idea is that God guided the slow process of evolution and at a certain point chose two individuals, Adam and Eve, and made a covenant with them. These two became the ancestors of the chosen people, but not of all humanity biologically. Even the Catholic Church has officially accepted the possibility of evolution. Pope Pius XII, in his 1950 encyclical Humani Generis, stated that the human body could have evolved from previous living matter, but that the soul was created directly by God. Pope John Paul II later confirmed in 1996 that evolution is more than a hypothesis. The Orthodox Church is more cautious, yet even there, many theologians accept evolution. Protestants are divided. Liberal denominations accept evolution, while conservative denominations reject it, insisting on a literal interpretation of Genesis. Fundamentalists created scientific creationism in a desperate attempt to prove that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Yet, when subjected to the harsh light of scrutiny, these arguments simply crumble. The entirety of our scientific data points unanimously to an Earth that is 4.5 billion years old, and to life that began its journey 3.5 billion years ago. If we accept the reality of evolution, then the people who lived before Adam are simply our ancient ancestors, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, the Neanderthals, and archaic Homo sapiens. They lived, they struggled, they evolved, and at some specific point in that vast timeline, Adam, or perhaps a group of people symbolically named Adam and Eve, emerged from among them. Genetics reveals a fascinating truth: all modern humans are descended from a small, resilient population that lived in Africa about 200,000 years ago. The analysis of mitochondrial DNA points us to mitochondrial Eve, the woman from whom all humans descend on their mother's side. Similarly, the analysis of the Y chromosome points to Y chromosomal Adam, the man from whom all men descend through the paternal line. However, science tells us these two figures lived at completely different times, separated by tens of thousands of years. They were not the biblical couple walking in a garden, but simply genetic bottlenecks, survivors whose lineages happened to endure while others faded away. But interestingly, genetics also reveals a second, much darker bottleneck roughly 70,000 years ago. This coincides with a global catastrophe, the eruption of the Toba supervolcano. Humanity was pushed to the very brink of extinction. Only a few thousand individuals survived the volcanic winter. Every single modern human outside of Africa is a descendant of those few desperate survivors. Perhaps this is the true catastrophe remembered in the universal myths of the flood. If so, then the biblical story is a condensed, poetic memory of a long and painful process. The creation of Adam represents the emergence of Homo sapiens. Eden is the memory of Africa, or the lush Middle East. The expulsion from Eden is the forced migration into harsher climates. Cain and Abel represent the ancient bloody conflict between farmers and nomadic herders. The flood is the echo of the Toba eruption, or the rapid melting of glaciers at the end of the Ice Age. Everything has a real, tangible basis, but it has been transmitted to us through symbols. This version satisfies many, but it creates a new philosophical problem. If everything is symbolic, where exactly is the boundary between symbol and reality? If Adam is merely a symbol, does that mean Abraham is also a symbol? What about Moses? What about Jesus? Where is the precise point where the fable ends and history begins? Theologians propose a criterion: events confirmed by independent historical sources are considered real, while the rest remain open to interpretation. By this standard, Abraham and Moses stand on the borderline. There is indirect archaeological evidence of their eras, but not of the men themselves. Jesus is definitely real. Roman historians recorded his existence, but Adam is not confirmed by anything other than the Bible itself, so his story may indeed be symbolic. But true believers object, and with good reason. If Adam is only a symbol, then the entire theology of the New Testament risks collapse. In his epistle to the Romans, St. Paul builds his entire theology on the contrast between Adam and Christ. Just as sin entered the cosmos through one man, so salvation came through one man. If Adam is not real, then, by this strict logic, the necessity of Christ is also called into question. This argument is powerful, but it is not absolute. Paul could have used Adam as a universally understood archetype without insisting on his historical literalism, much like modern preachers refer to the prodigal son without claiming he lived at a specific address. A symbol can convey a profound theological truth, even if it is not a historical fact. My analysis suggests that the truth lies somewhere in the shadows between these two extremes. Adam was likely a real person, or perhaps a leader of a group, who lived at the very dawn of recorded civilization. His story was captured using symbolism, poetic imagery, and theological concepts. Other people lived before him, that is an indisputable fact, but Adam became the progenitor of the specific lineage through whom the revelation arrived. In this sense, he is the first, not chronologically, but theologically. Consider the evidence found in the earth itself. In 1924, in South Africa, deep within the Tongue Cave, a worker struck a rock with a pickaxe. The stone shattered, revealing a skull. It was small, childlike, but undeniably strange. The worker handed this anomaly to the quarry manager, who eventually passed it to the professor of anatomy, Raymond Dart. Dart examined the skull and realized he was holding a sensation in his hands. It was neither human nor ape, but something trapped in between, a creature that walked on two legs, but possessed a brain the size of an orange. Dart named the find Australopithecus africanus, the southern ape from Africa. The skull was estimated to be 2 million years old. The scientific world exploded in controversy. Some shouted that it was a fraud. Others claimed it was merely a deformed monkey skull. A third group argued that even if it was a human ancestor, the gap between it and us was insurmountable. But the facts began to accumulate, layer by layer. New discoveries confirmed the existence of transitional forms between apes and humans. Today, 100 years later, we possess hundreds of thousands of such discoveries: bones, skulls, teeth, tools, and traces of ancient settlements. They tell a continuous story spanning 7 million years, from the first upright primates to modern humans. Each find is dated, studied, and cataloged with rigorous precision. Dating methods have become incredibly accurate: radiocarbon analysis, the argon method, thermoluminescence, and soil layer stratigraphy. All of them yield consistent, corroborating results. And they all say one thing: humanity is far, far older than 6,000 years. Contrast this with the biblical chronology, which is based strictly on genealogies. From Adam to Noah, there are 10 generations. From Noah to Abraham, another 10. From Abraham to Christ, there are about 42 generations, according to the Gospel of Matthew. If we sum up the ages of the patriarchs, we get about 4,000 years before Christ, plus 2,000 years after. That gives a total of 6,000 years of world history. In the 17th century, Archbishop James Ussher even calculated the exact date of the creation of the world, October 23, 4004 BC, at 9 o'clock in the morning. He wrote this with absolute seriousness. But archaeology mocks this figure with stone and sand. In Egypt, the Great Pyramids of Giza were built about 4,500 years ago. According to Ussher's timeline, this would be only 500 years after the creation of the universe. It would imply that Adam could have walked over and shaken hands with the builders of the pyramids. It is absurd, but it gets even worse for the traditional timeline. In Mesopotamia, the great cities of Ur and Uruk existed 5,000 years ago. In Turkey, the settlement of Sadal Hoyuk dates back 9,000 years, and in the same region, the temple complex of Göbekli Tepe was constructed 11,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe is a total shock to archaeologists and historians alike. Massive stone pillars, weighing up to 20 tons, covered with intricate carvings of animals, were erected by hunter-gatherers long before the invention of agriculture, the wheel, or writing. This site shatters our understanding of the timeline of civilization. This discovery completely overturns the established academic paradigm that settled life came first, followed by food surpluses, and only then by religion and monumental construction. Here, the evidence suggests the exact opposite. First came religion, then came settled life. People gathered for complex rituals, they built a massive temple, and only then did they settle down to live in its shadow. But the most staggering detail is its age. 11,000 years old, almost twice the age of the entire world according to strict biblical chronology. Who built Göbekli Tepe if Adam did not yet exist? The answer is uncomfortable for dogmatics. It was Adam's people. They were intelligent, organized, and deeply religious, long before the timeline allows. They possessed culture, art, and a complex belief system. They certainly did not wait for Adam to start thinking. Let us move deeper into the past. Consider the enigma of cave paintings. Across Europe, there are hundreds of caves adorned with images of animals, people, and abstract symbols, the most famous being the caves of Altamira in Spain and Lascaux in France. These drawings date back between 15,000 and 36,000 years. The artists depicted bison, horses, and deer with breathtaking skill. They mastered the use of perspective, the interplay of light and shadow, and the illusion of movement. These are not the primitive scribbles of savages, but high art. Who were these masters? We call them Cro-Magnons, early Homo sapiens, who entered Europe about 45,000 years ago. But they were not the only ones creating art. In the Nerja cave in Spain, drawings have been found that are 65,000 years old. These were not made by us. They were made by Neanderthals. For a long time, arrogance led us to believe that Neanderthals were stupid brutes incapable of abstract thought. But recent discoveries refute this entirely. Neanderthals buried their dead with rituals, they crafted jewelry, and they may well have possessed language. In Indonesia, on the island of Sulawesi, cave paintings 44,000 years old were found depicting scenes of hunting pigs and buffalo. The artists drew therianthropes, figures with animal bodies and human heads. This is the oldest known depiction of fantastical creatures. It is mythology dating back 44,000 years. Even then, deep in the prehistory, people were contemplating the spirit world, transformation, and the mystical connection between human and beast. In Africa, the story is even older. In the Blombos cave in South Africa, pieces of ochre engraved with geometric patterns were discovered. They are 77,000 years old. These are the oldest known works of abstract art on the planet. What did these patterns signify? Were they symbols, a method of recording information, or simply decoration? We do not know. But the fact remains, people were creating art 70,000 years before Adam supposedly opened his eyes. Now let us turn to genetics. This is the most accurate science for reconstructing the past, for DNA does not lie. Every mutation in the genome is a biological timestamp. The more differences there are between two organisms, the more distant their common ancestor. By analyzing the DNA of modern humans, geneticists are reconstructing our entire family tree. The results are unequivocal. All humans on Earth belong to the same species, Homo sapiens. We appeared in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. The oldest fossils of Homo sapiens were unearthed in Morocco and Ethiopia, dating back to that same era. Then there was a long period when our species remained in Africa, developing and adapting. About 70,000 years ago, a small group, possibly only a few hundred individuals, migrated from Africa to the Middle East. Every single human being outside of Africa today is a descendant of that small band of travelers. This is confirmed by the analysis of mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondria are passed down exclusively through the maternal line. By comparing the mitochondrial genomes of people from every corner of the globe, geneticists have calculated that we all share a common maternal ancestor. She has been named mitochondrial Eve. She lived in Africa about 150,000 years ago. Similarly, the Y chromosome is passed down only through the male line. Analysis shows that there was a chromosomal Adam who lived about 200,000 years ago. Again, he was not the only man, but the one whose Y chromosome has been preserved in every modern male. Here is the crucial point: these two figures lived at completely different times, separated by tens of thousands of years. They were never a couple. They are simply genetic bottlenecks, the narrow points of the hourglass through which all our genes have passed. But the most fascinating revelation lies elsewhere. There are traces of other human species hidden in our DNA. When Homo sapiens migrated from Africa, they encountered Neanderthals in Eurasia. The Neanderthals had been living there for 300,000 years and were perfectly adapted to the cold climate. Sapiens and Neanderthals met, and what always happens when closely related species meet, happened. They interbred. Geneticists have discovered that modern humans outside of Africa possess between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Africans do not have this, because their ancestors did not leave the continent to encounter the Neanderthals. This proves that the interbreeding was real. It happened roughly 50,000 years ago, as we expanded our territory. Moreover, in East Asia, Homo sapiens encountered yet another species of human, the Denisovans. They were only discovered in 2008, identified from bone fragments found in the Denisova cave in the Altai Mountains. It turned out they were a distinct species, related to Neanderthals but not identical to them, and we interbred with them too. Modern Melanesians, Australian Aborigines, and the indigenous peoples of New Guinea carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. It turns out that we have the blood of 3 distinct species of humans flowing through our veins: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. We are hybrids. This is not a theory. It is a fact confirmed by the analysis of thousands of genomes. And this is completely consistent with the concept of pre-humans. Before Adam, other species of humans lived. Adam's descendants mixed with them. We are the living result of this ancient union. Neanderthal DNA is not just biological debris in our genome. It gave us specific evolutionary advantages: genes responsible for immunity, adaptation to cold environments, and the ability to digest certain foods. Neanderthals had lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They had already solved the problems of survival there. When we interbred with them, we acquired these adaptations ready-made. This accelerated our colonization of Eurasia. But there is also a price to be paid. Some Neanderthal genes are associated with an increased risk of diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and depression. Evolution is not perfect. It is a series of trade-offs. It is a cruel irony of evolution that genes perfectly honed for survival in one environment can become a burden in another. The Neanderthals vanished from the physical world about 40,000 years ago, yet their genetic ghosts continue to haunt our own DNA. But why did they die out? For decades, the prevailing theory was a bloody war of extermination, that Homo sapiens slaughtered them in a violent competition for resources. However, new data reveals a much more complex and tragic picture. The Neanderthals were few in number. Their population was fragmented into tiny, isolated groups, suffering from low genetic diversity and high levels of inbreeding. They were incredibly fragile, vulnerable to any sudden shift in climate or the introduction of new diseases. The arrival of sapiens was simply the final straw. It was not necessarily a conquest by the spear, although violence likely occurred. It was a conquest by demographics, a competition for food and territory, and ultimately interbreeding. The Neanderthals were not merely wiped out, they were absorbed. They dissolved into the expanding ocean of the sapiens population like a drop of ink in water. If we dare to apply this scientific logic to the biblical narrative, a startling image emerges. Sapiens represent the lineage of Adam. The Neanderthals are the people before Adam. They met, they clashed, and they interbred. The Neanderthals disappeared as a distinct species, but their essence remained. Cain found his wife among them. The Nephilim were the hybrid offspring of this ancient union between sapiens and Neanderthals. The flood, then, can be seen as the great event that washed away the last remnants of the pure Neanderthals. After the waters receded, only the hybrids us remained. This interpretation may sound like science fiction, but it aligns with the hard facts far better than traditional theology ever could. Traditional theology dismisses Neanderthals as mere animals, devoid of souls. But if that is true, why did they bury their dead with such care? Why did they craft jewelry to adorn themselves? Why did they paint masterpieces in the depths of dark caves? This is not the behavior of a beast. This is the behavior of an intelligent being aware of its own mortality, possessing an aesthetic sense, and quite possibly a religion. If Neanderthals possessed souls, then they too are children of the Creator. Their encounter with sapiens was not a conflict between the chosen ones and animals, but a meeting of two lost branches of humanity. One branch received the revelation through Adam, the other lived in the twilight without it. Eventually they united, and the capacity for revelation spread to all. Some theologians recoil at this, objecting that interbreeding with Neanderthals was a sin, a mixing with the unclean, and that this is why God sent the flood. But let us be honest, this logic is racist and repulsive. It assumes that some people are biologically purer than others. This is the ideology of eugenics, not divinity. God does not divide beings by race or species. All intelligent life is equal before the divine. My analysis suggests that the problem was not the mixing of blood, but the loss of spirituality. The Nephilim were considered evil not because they were genetic hybrids, but because they abandoned the light. They relied on physical strength, violence, and base lust. The flood was not a punishment for biological mixing, but a purification of spiritual degradation. Now, let us turn to the timeline of culture. We are taught that civilization began with the Neolithic Revolution 10,000 years ago, that people moved from hunting to farming, built the first cities, and invented writing. But every new shovel of earth, dug by archaeologists, pushes this date further back into the abyss of time. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe stands as a stone testament built 11,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers. In Jordan, the settlement of Ain Ghazal thrived 9,000 years ago. Archaeologists found life-size statues made of plaster there, ghostly faces staring from the past. In Syria, the city of Tel Karmel is 11,000 years old, complete with towers, temples, and homes. All of this predates the biblical Adam. In Europe, the evidence is even more striking. Camps of mammoth hunters dating back 30,000 years have been uncovered. These were not crude shelters, they were houses built from mammoth bones, roofed with skins. Inside there were hearths, specialized tools, and jewelry. These were not primitive cave dwellers grunting in the dark. These were organized communities, with a sophisticated culture. They sewed complex clothing, evidenced by the delicate bone needles found at the sites. They crafted jewelry from shells brought from hundreds of kilometers away, proving the existence of long-distance trade networks. In Siberia, at the Malta site, which is 24,000 years old, researchers found the famous Paleolithic Venuses, figurines of women carved from mammoth ivory. These figures are found all across Europe and Asia, from France to Lake Baikal. They are clearly cult objects, linked to the worship of fertility, or a great mother goddess. Religion is at least 25,000 years old. In the Dolní Věstonice cave in the Czech Republic, ceramics dating back 27,000 years were discovered. These are the oldest ceramics in the world. People were molding clay into animal figurines and firing them, not for practical use, but for ritual purposes. This confirms the existence of mythology and a complex belief system. And there was music. In the Hohlefels cave in Germany, a flute carved from a vulture's wing bone was found. It is 40,000 years old. It has 5 holes and can still reproduce a pentatonic scale. Think about that. People were playing instruments, singing and dancing ages before Adam supposedly existed. And what of language? Anatomically modern humans have possessed a larynx capable of producing complex speech sounds for about 300,000 years. The FOXP2 gene, which is critical for speech, is identical in all modern humans, and differs from the Neanderthal version by only 2 tiny mutations. This suggests that the capacity for complex speech existed in the common ancestor of sapiens and Neanderthals, perhaps 500,000 years ago. We have indirect evidence of language in their symbolism, their art, and their complex tools. You need language to teach someone how to knap a flint spearhead. You need language to coordinate a mammoth hunt. You need language to weave myths about spirits and gods. Humans have possessed this gift for at least 50,000 years. Linguists are currently attempting to reconstruct the Proto-World language, the mother tongue from which all modern languages originated. It likely fractured into separate families about 15,000 years ago, as the Ice Age ended, but echoes remain. Words for mother, father, fire, and water bear striking similarities across completely unrelated languages. Perhaps these are the remnants of a 50,000-year-old proto-language. If so, Adam did not create language. language existed long before him. What then is the meaning of the biblical passage where God gives Adam the authority to name everything? Perhaps it is symbolic. It implies that Adam received language, not merely for communication, but for perception, for knowing the true essence of things. By naming an animal, he was not just labeling it, he was understanding its very nature. It is not merely a matter of vocabulary, it is a matter of profound knowledge. The mystics of the Kabbalah teach that the names of things in the original Hebrew reflect their true spiritual essence. Each letter possesses a specific numerical value, a hidden symbolism that vibrates with the frequency of creation. By calling a thing by its true name, one gains dominion over it. In this view, Adam was the first to perceive the true names. This is esoteric knowledge, not linguistic mechanics. However, let us descend from the mystical to the hard facts of history. The most striking anomaly in the archaeological record is that human culture developed with agonizing unevenness. In one region, people were constructing complex cities, while in another, they continued to dwell in caves. In Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago, civilization had already mastered writing, mathematics, and astronomy. Meanwhile, in Australia, the Aboriginal people lived by hunting and gathering until the arrival of Europeans in the 18th century. That is a gap in development of 10,000 years. Why? The standard academic answer points to geography and resources. Mesopotamia possessed the Fertile Crescent, rich land, rivers, and an abundance of wild grains waiting to be domesticated. In Australia, the ancient poor soils were hostile to the domestication of plants and animals. But that is not the entire answer. The Aboriginal people were no less intelligent than the Mesopotamians. They possessed a rich, complex oral folklore, intricate kinship systems, and a profound knowledge of the starry sky. They simply had no desperate incentive to switch to the grinding labor of agriculture. If we apply this anthropological lens to the pages of Genesis, a fascinating picture resolves. Perhaps Adam was a man from a specific region where a cultural breakthrough occurred, the Near East, where wheat, barley, sheep, and goats were first bent to the will of man. Adam becomes a symbol of this Neolithic revolution, and the people before Adam represent the rest of humanity living in the traditional ancient ways. In this light, the expulsion from Eden is not a divine punishment, but a historical transition from gathering to agriculture. Eden represents the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. There is no need to toil, nature itself provides the banquet. The fall is the choice of agriculture. Suddenly, people had to work the earth, plow the fields, and wage war against weeds. But this sacrifice led to food surpluses, population explosions, cities, and eventually, civilization. This interpretation perfectly explains the curse of the earth. The text says, "The earth is cursed for you, thorns and thistles will grow for you." This is not a magical hex, but a literal description of the reality of farming. Wild land is constantly reclaimed by nature. It is overgrown with weeds and thorns. You must fight them every single day. Hunters do not know this struggle. They accept the gifts of nature as they are. Farmers enter into a conflict with nature to subjugate it. And what of the curse upon women? In pain you shall bring forth children. Why did sickness and agony increase after the fall? Tradition calls it punishment, but science offers a grim explanation. With the transition to agriculture, the human diet changed drastically. Cereals provided more calories, but far fewer vitamins and minerals than the very diet of the hunter. Women's health deteriorated. Moreover, a sedentary lifestyle led to a population boom. Women began to give birth much more frequently, every 2 to 3 years, instead of every 4 to 5 years among nomadic hunter-gatherers. More births meant more complications and more death. Anthropologists have studied the skeletons of people from before and after the Neolithic Revolution. The results are shocking. The farmers showed significantly more signs of malnutrition, disease, and spinal injury. Average height decreased, and life expectancy shortened. It is a dark paradox. Agriculture provided more food, but it made people less healthy because their diet became monotonous, dependent on 1 or 2 crops. High population density led to the first epidemics, and social inequality meant that while the kings ate well, the masses starved. This is the true expulsion from paradise, the transition from the natural abundance and robust health of the hunter to the backbreaking labor and chronic diseases of the farmer. But this transition was the necessary price of civilization. Without agriculture, there would be no cities, no writing, no science, and no art. The fall was not a descent, but a painful step forward that felt like a fall. Now we must address the cataclysm. The flood, was it a historical reality? Geology tells us clearly that there was no single global flood that covered the entire planet, including Mount Everest. Such an event would require 3 times more water than exists in the Earth's hydrosphere. But there were massive catastrophic local floods. One theory suggests that about 7,000 years ago, the natural dam between the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea collapsed. The Mediterranean poured into the Black Sea basin with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. The water level rose by 100 meters in a few short months. Entire coastal civilizations were swallowed by the abyss. The survivors fled, carrying with them the memory of this apocalypse, which may have formed the basis of the flood myth. Another version connects the myth to the end of the Ice Age. 12,000 years ago, a period of sharp warming began. The colossal glaciers that covered North America and Europe started to melt. Giant glacial lakes formed, held back by walls of ice. When these dams inevitably broke, unimaginable torrents of water rushed into the ocean. The global sea level rose by 120 meters over several thousand years. It flooded the vast coastal plains, where the majority of the human population lived. It was a slow-motion global catastrophe. It was not a single flood, but a series of devastating deluges around the world. The memory of this trauma has been preserved by all peoples. The Sumerians tell of Ziusudra, who survived the flood on a great ship. The Babylonians tell of Utnapishtim, the Greeks of Deucalion, the Indians of Manu, and the Chinese of the Great Flood during the reign of Emperor Yao. The Aztecs speak of the destruction of the fourth world by water. The biblical Noah is simply the Jewish version of this universal human myth. The details are unique, but the core plot is identical. God warns the righteous man of the coming doom. He builds an ark, saves his family, and the animals. The waters cover the earth, then recede. The ship comes to rest on a mountain, and the survivors give rise to a new humanity. Was Noah a real person? Perhaps there was a specific man who survived one of these great inundations, saved himself on a raft or a boat, and told his descendants the harrowing tale. Over centuries, the story became overgrown with details, exaggerations, and symbolism, transforming into a myth, but at its molten core lies a real event. Mesopotamian archaeology shows traces of such catastrophic floods. In the ancient city of Ur, a 3-meter-thick layer of river clay was found separating human cultural layers. The famous archaeologist, Leonard Woolley, who excavated Ur, announced to the world that he had found evidence of the flood. Later analysis proved that this layer was local, caused by a massive flooding of the Euphrates River, and not global. Yet for the people who lived there, that local flood was their entire world. However, when we widen our scope, we find that other ancient cities in Mesopotamia do not exhibit a synchronous flood layer. This archaeological silence speaks volumes. It suggests that the flood was a local cataclysm, not a planetary one. Yet, for the inhabitants of ancient Mesopotamia, it seemed global because they had no concept of the vast continents beyond their horizon. To them, the Euphrates Valley was the world. When their land was submerged, the entire cosmos was submerged. This is the logic of the ancient mind. Noah did not construct a floating zoo for every species on Earth, but a sanctuary for the local fauna essential to his survival. Not all of humanity was extinguished, but only the specific population of the river valley. The rest of the world continued to breathe, to live, unaware that a catastrophe was unfolding in the cradle of civilization. If we accept this, the glaring contradiction between science and the Bible evaporates. The flood was real, but it was local. Humanity did not hit the reset button with Noah. Rather, it continued through survivors in distant regions. Noah became the progenitor of one specific branch in Mesopotamia, the line from which the Semitic peoples would eventually descend. Other branches of humanity descended from other survivors in other corners of the globe. This interpretation finally explains the origin of the different races. Traditional theology attempts to trace all human racial diversity back to Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But the cold, hard data of genetics refutes this. Racial differences are sculpted by environment and mutation over tens of thousands of years, not a mere 4 millennia since the time of Noah. If Noah was only the ancestor of the Semites, and other races originated independently from the ancient pre-Adamite populations, then the contradiction is removed entirely. But here, a shadow of doubt emerges. A new problem arises. If humanity did not start anew with Noah, then what was the point of the flood? The traditional answer is to cleanse the world of sin, but if sinners survived in other regions, then the divine cleansing was a failure. Sin returned immediately after the waters receded. In the very next chapter of Genesis, Ham commits a transgression against his father. Then humanity builds the Tower of Babel in arrogance. Where is the promised renewal? My analysis suggests a different motive. The purpose of the flood was not total annihilation, but surgical preservation. The goal was to save the righteous line. God wanted to preserve this specific genetic and spiritual signal for the future. Through this line would come Abraham, Moses, David, and eventually Christ. The rest of humanity could live their lives, but the chosen line had to remain pure. This is not ancient racism, it is theological logistics. God chose one people to be the vessel through which revelation would eventually flow to all nations. The Jewish people were not chosen for privilege, but for a purpose to be an instrument. Through them came the law, the prophets, and the Messiah. After Christ, the distinction between Jew and Gentile was erased. All peoples are equal before the divine. But in the time of Noah, this distinction was a matter of survival. The flood preserved the seed of Adam. This does not mean that other people had no value. They were simply not part of this specific operational plan. They walked their own path to God through the voice of conscience and natural law. The Apostle Paul addresses this explicitly in his epistle to the Romans. He writes that the Gentiles, who lack the tablets of the law of Moses, are a law unto themselves. Their conscience bears witness, and their thoughts accuse or justify them. This implies that God judges not only by the written text, but by the natural moral sense embedded in the human soul. The people before Adam did not know the law of Moses, but they possessed a conscience, and they are judged by that standard. This logic solves the profound problem of divine justice. How can God judge people who never heard the gospel? The answer is that every person knows in the quiet of their heart what is good and what is evil. Cultural differences in morality are superficial. The deep axioms, do not murder, do not steal, do not lie, help your neighbor, are universal constants. This is the natural law written into the firmware of humanity. This leads us to a startling conclusion. Adam did not bring morality into the world. Morality existed before him as an intrinsic part of human nature. Adam received a written law, codified and detailed. This was a qualitative leap, not a quantitative one. It was not the invention of morality, but its systematization. Modern science confirms that morality has a biological basis. We see the embryonic sparks of this in primates. Chimpanzees share food, comfort the injured, and punish those who cheat the group. This is not culture, it is instinct, honed by evolution for survival. Social animals must cooperate, and cooperation requires trust, fairness, and mutual assistance. Humans have perfected this biological morality by adding rational justification and a spiritual dimension. We don't just instinctively help others, we understand why it is right. We don't just fear punishment, we feel guilt. This is conscience, the echo of the divine voice within. If morality is biological, then the Neanderthals possessed it as well. They buried their dead with flowers, a gesture that screams of empathy and ritual. They cared for their sick and wounded, an act that requires deep altruism. These were moral beings, not soulless automatons. So what was the specific spark that distinguished Adam? It was not the presence of morality, but the awareness of God as the source of that morality. Adam's people knew that murder was wrong, but Adam learned why. He learned that killing is wrong, because man is created in the image of God. To kill a human is to desecrate the divine reflection. This is no longer just ethics, it is theology. Consider the Sabbath. Adam was commanded to rest on the seventh day, because God rested after creation. This is not a biological necessity, but a spiritual discipline. It is a recognition that existence is not just about labor, but about rest, reflection, and worship. Yes, the people before Adam worked and rested, but Adam received a rhythm connected to the celestial order. This is the essence of the covenant. It is not merely a list of rules, but a relationship. It is a promise of faithfulness. God promises to be the God of Adam, and Adam promises to align his will with the divine. It is a sacred union, a marriage between the finite and the infinite. Before Adam, people lived under the laws of nature. Adam was the first to live under the laws of grace. It serves to remind us that we are part of something far greater than ourselves. It proves that our true history did not begin a mere 6,000 years ago, but stretches back hundreds of thousands of years into the abyss of time. We carry within our veins the blood of many forgotten peoples, the echoes of lost cultures, and the remnants of countless attempts to understand the meaning of life. And perhaps all these attempts are precious to the Creator, because each one is a movement toward Him. It may be a stumbling, uncertain step taken in the primordial darkness, but it is a step nonetheless. So I ask you, what do you think? Does knowing that you carry Neanderthal genes change your understanding of who you are? You hold the genetic memories of the Ice Age, the living legacy of entire nations that vanished into the mist thousands of years ago. Does this complex heritage make you less significant, or does it make you even more special in the eyes of God?